All right, in this video, we'll be looking at the cell cycle. This will be a two-part section. I have a cell cycle 1 and a cell cycle 2, which will go into a little bit more detail. This is just a general overview of the cell cycle. So the cell cycle is a highly regulated series of events for the growth and reproduction of cells. Nice technical definition for you. Essentially, the cell cycle is the life cycle of a cell that begins at the end of reproduction. So once a cell divides, it begins its new life. It goes through a time of growth, normal life cycle, and then it will end with that cell dividing itself. And cell division creates two identical daughter cells from one parent cell. The cell cycle consists of two main phases: interphase, which you can see here, these three phases, which is about 90% of a cell's life. This graph doesn't show 90, it shows like 75, but it's just so it can fit all these words in here. But about 90% of a cell's life is spent in interphase. And another 10% is the M phase, which involves mitosis, which is the division of the nucleus, and cytokinesis, which is the division of the cytoplasm. So interphase is broken up into three stages. I don't know if I have a picture of all the stages. I really don't, but that's okay. Interphase is three stages of G1, S, and G2. I have it right here, actually. Interphase, the word inter means between, so you can think of this as the phase between cell divisions. Again, this is the normal life of the cell. The cell's growing and doing things that cells do. It is divided into three phases: G1, which is just cell growth, preparation for DNA synthesis. S phase is when the DNA is actually replicated. And then the G2 phase is when the components of the cytoplasm are doubled. The cell is basically preparing for division. So those three, and the G stands for like gap phase, but I typically think of it as S, or as growth phases, whereas the S is a synthesis phase because DNA is being replicated. So here are cells in interphase. The way that you can look at a cell and tell that it's an interphase is that it has a very clear nucleus. A very clear nucleus denotes that the nucleus hasn't gone away, obviously, and there aren't any chromosomes present. What you see here instead is this substance called chromatin, where there's not any clear condensing of the DNA. And here's that G1S, G2 again, and you got M phase. DNA is replicated. A lot of times, what we see when we think of DNA, we think of these X-shaped chromosomes, but again, you don't see those in interphase, but the DNA is replicated. So we go from these normal-looking chromosomes to these X-shaped chromosomes, where each chromosome has an identical pair called a sister chromatid, and we will talk about that later. So mitosis is made up of four distinct phases. So you have interphase, which is this whole other thing, and then mitosis is four distinct phases: prophase, metaphase, anaphase, telophase. We'll talk more about those phases later. And so mitosis is important for growth, tissue repair, asexual reproduction. It ensures the transfer of the complete genome from one parent cell to two identical daughter cells. And again, it alternates between interphase and mitosis. And then it's followed by a process called cytokinesis. And the role of cytokinesis is to ensure the equal distribution of cytoplasmic components, things like mitochondria and ERs and all those things. And it finishes the process. So mitosis is the division of the nucleus, right? So now at the end of mitosis, you have two new nuclei, and at the end of cytokinesis, you have two new cells. So, and after cytosis, cells can enter into, and you probably saw this on the last picture, a phase called G0, where the cell is no longer dividing, and they can stay in this phase basically as a rest. Think of G0 as a rest phase. A non-dividing cell can exit the cell cycle at any time and become this kind of G0 phase. It can even live out its life. Some cells, like red blood cells, don't even have a nucleus, and so they don't divide anymore. They're just kind of done. They're made, and then they go and do a thing, and then they die. And so that is a basic overview of the cell cycle. In the next video, we will go into more detail about all the different phases of mitosis.